Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Denise Duffield. I am the Associate Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles, and I serve on the steering committee of Back from the Brink, bringing communities together to abolish nuclear weapons. We are really excited about our program tonight, Building Momentum for Nuclear Weapons Abolition After 2MSP, Next Generation Perspectives, a roundtable discussion with Maral Hassan-Shahi, Maylene Hughes, and Molly McGinty, moderated by Maddie Rose. After the roundtable, we'll have some Q&A using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And do note we'll be turning off the Q&A and the chat during the roundtable so we can give our panelists our full attention. We also ask that folks be respectful and limit conversations in the chat. After the Q&A, we'll take a look at what Back from the Brink's been up to this year and our plans moving forward. But first, I'll kick us off with just a few words about 2MSP, the second meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that took place in New York City last week. The 2MSP saw participation from 94 countries who concluded with resolve to challenge the false doctrine of deterrence, further study the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons, and to continue centering the voice of Habakasha and communities harmed by nuclear weapons. Nuclear-affected communities also delivered a strong statement, as did the financial community, the faith community, and 23 parliamentarians, which included one U.S. representative, Massachusetts House member Jim McGovern, who, as many of you know, is the lead sponsor of HRES 77, the Congressional Back from the Brink resolution. There's much more that happened at 2MSP, which we'll hear about from our panelists, and you can read about on the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN's website. ICAN, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and many organizations with whom we partnered did an outstanding job coordinating 65 side events, panel discussions, art exhibits, concerts that were attended by hundreds of campaigners from around the world. It was incredibly inspiring and nourishing to the soul just to be among so many nuclear abolitionists, to connect with friends and colleagues, to make new acquaintances, and to see and hear many passionate youth voices who will hopefully be leading this work in the years to come. And now we must find ways to further harness this enthusiasm and camaraderie and marshal it into an even more visible, active, diverse constituency for nuclear disarmament here where we live in the United States, a country whose leadership could be a game changer in the global struggle to abolish nuclear weapons. We know that we face strong headwinds in an increasingly dangerous world that is moving ever closer to the brink of nuclear war. In stark contrast to the sanity, science, and morality that we saw at 2MSP, nuclear-armed states are engaged in new brinkmanship in a dangerous and costly new arms race. The U.S. Strategic Posture Commission released a report in October declaring that the U.S. must be prepared to simultaneously fight large-scale wars with nuclear-armed Russia and China. The use of nuclear weapons has been threatened in Ukraine and Gaza, deadly wars that rage on with no end in sight. Climate chaos is upon us, and democracy, our ability to have a say in nuclear weapons policy, or any policy for that matter, is at grave risk. Meanwhile, nuclear weapons issues continue to get very little media coverage. For example, not one major U.S. outlet covered the 2MSP in any meaningful way, leaving the public and communities with little awareness of the severity of the threat or that there's something that they can do about it. And finally, nuclear disarmament advocacy is woefully and shamefully underfunded, especially grassroots, who are best able to bring pressure to bear on their representatives and decision makers in Washington. A Vox article this summer revealed that the $100 million spent making the movie Oppenheimer was 3 times more than philanthropists spent on nuclear disarmament last year, and very, very little of that went to grassroots organizing. Now, at the end of our meeting tonight, we will take a few minutes to talk about our end-of-year fundraising and matching campaign that we hope you'll consider contributing to. But all in all, when we step back, when we look at the challenges before us, it's plain to see that it's really up to us, all of us, to hold on to the excitement and the love and the momentum generated at 2MSP and let it fuel us moving forward. We know that nuclear abolition is possible. That's what's missing is political will, and that is something we, the people, have the power to change. So before we go on to our roundtable, I'll go over just a few quick points about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, an historic treaty adopted at the United Nations in 2017 with the support of 122 countries. The TPNW was born out of frustration with nuclear-armed states' refusal to fulfill their obligation under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to eliminate their arsenals and the lack of focus on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. It's modeled on existing treaties that outlaw other types of weapons considered inhumane, such as biological and chemical weapons, landmines, and cluster munitions. It embodies a route to the goal that we all share, which is the abolition of nuclear weapons. The TPNW is actively opposed by the US and all countries that possess nuclear weapons. And of course, we can only achieve nuclear abolition if all of the nuclear-armed countries agree to abolish their nuclear weapons. Next slide. And that's where Back from the Brink comes in. Back from the Brink was founded after the adoption of the TPNW in 2017 as a vehicle to build public demand and political will for nuclear abolition in the US, primarily through local community-based organizing. We are a coalition of organizations, individuals, and elected officials who call on the US to lead negotiations among nuclear-armed states for a multilateral, verifiable, time-bound agreement to eliminate their nuclear arsenals and secure a set of common-sense policy solutions that can help prevent nuclear war. We look forward to sharing our accomplishments and our plans moving forward later in the program. But it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight's roundtable discussion, Maddie Rose. Maddie is the Outreach Coordinator for the Global Security Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and she serves on Back from the Brink Steering Committee. Take it away, Maddie.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, folks. As Denise mentioned, my name is Madison or Maddie Rose. I use she, her pronouns, and I am on staff at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I'm also on the steering committee of Back from the Brink, and I have the pleasure of being the moderator for this panel this evening. So I'm going to start off by introducing our speakers. Marl Hassan Shahi serves on the board of directors at Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles, and is a climate and health ambassador for PSR National. She has over 12 years of extensive work and leadership in the environment, global health, and peace sector, collaborating with esteemed international organizations, including the United Nations. She began her involvement in nuclear disarmament as a national student representative for the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW, and continues to work with both IPPNW and the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Our next speaker is Maylene Hughes, who is the Grassroots Organizing and Policy Coordinator for the Nuclear Threats Program at Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. She leads organizing efforts for the Back from the Brink campaign in Southern California, focusing on intersectional outreach that connects nuclear weapons with social justice issues. Maylene is a graduate of Occidental College, where she received a BA in critical theory and social justice and had roles as an equity ambassador and internships with Liberation Ventures, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and the Irish Network Against Racism. And third, Molly McGinty is the program director of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW, which she joined in 2019 as a Quaker Voluntary Service Fellow. And I have to give a quick shout out. I was also a Quaker Voluntary Service Fellow. Great organization, brought me to this work. Molly has previously engaged in advocacy related to police demilitarization and anti-human trafficking policy. And it was through these positions that she came to understand the power of grassroots organizing and youth-led movements. Molly also works with IPPNW to raise the voices of young people for nuclear abolition. She currently serves as one of IPPNW's representatives to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, International Steering Group, and help leads youth for TPNW. So I'd now like to welcome all three of our speakers to the conversation. And while they're turning their cameras on, I just want to reiterate, we're going to start with some questions we have prepared for the panelists, and we're going to have some time at the end for question and answer. So to all of our webinar attendees, if you have some questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom to ask them. All right, so our first question for all of our panelists, we'd like to begin with asking you to share a highlight or a compelling moment from your time attending the second meeting of states parties. Could maybe be a conversation you had, an event you attended, or just reflections on the experience and being there with so many of your other nuclear weapons abolition activists. Maral, would you like to go first?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel. So happy to be here. So many moments, so many things happened during the last week, and it's really hard to pick just one. I was overwhelmed by seeing all the activities from different countries coming together, being in the United Nations, among with the governments attending there. And mostly I was moved by the amount of action and voice of the people who are coming from the affected communities, representing them, the survivors, hibakushas. I think that one of the best moments was the first day, the first session, when we heard the statement from the hibakusha from Hiroshima. And that was one of the highlights for me, very moving, very inspiring. And the other moment that was a moment of really hope and unity was the day that we were marching with all the people from back from the Brink and other activists. That day, just seeing everybody from different generations, from back from the Brink, coming together, supporting us and supporting the youth to being the front runners, and the conversation we made during that day and that march was really a highlight for me. And that day, I really told myself that we are going to abolish nuclear weapons. These people are going to do this.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love that. Maylene, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, everyone. It's great to be here. I had a great time, honestly. It was my first big event in terms of being with Back from the Brink and PSRLA. I had a lot of compelling moments and highlights during the time in New York, but I would say I really enjoyed the youth MSP and being able to see a lot of young folks and being able to engage and connect and talk to one another and talking about how can we move this movement forward? How can we take this movement and add our own spin? How can we bring this to other youth folks? And I was able to talk to folks just like Congressperson McGovern and Vincent Ntandi, and those conversations that I had with them were very inspiring, especially the conversations that I had with other youth folks, specifically when we broke out into breakout groups and it was a more intimate connection. Just being able to like pick everyone's brain and seeing where we all come from and how we came to this movement and how can we bring other folks in? How can we bring our peers, our friends? So, yeah.
Thank you. That sounds really powerful. And that's a great question that I think we'll dive more into later. But before we do, Molly, come on in.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think that Marl and Maylene really covered a lot of the excitement of the week. I mean, there were about 700 people from civil society representatives, people from civil society that were there throughout the week, which is really incredible when we're talking about an issue that sometimes when we're talking to people out in the public, they say, people still work on that, or I didn't know that that was still a problem. You know, recent threats have shown otherwise, but it's still, you know, we hear all the time that we need to reach more and more people. So to be in a room with 700 experts, young leaders, affected community members, hibakusha, I think was for me a really powerful moment, and to remember the power that each of us have, both individually and as a group. I think one thing with this treaty being so new, you know, this being only the second meeting, that the second time that the states are meeting, remembering that the work that we're doing right now is really building up the foundation of the treaty and has the ability to impact future provisions of the treaty and the public's perception of this treaty, and how we're going to make sure that all states, including nuclear armed states in the US, join it eventually, I think is incredibly powerful. I mean, we started off the week with about 250 people from over 30 countries at the campaigners meetings that was outside the UN. And then when we got to the UN, every day there were 3 side events, there were external events going on during the day and every evening. And I think maybe most importantly, when we're talking about the treaty's proceedings, whether we're talking about the youth statement or statements from affected community members or the scientific advisory group to the TPNW, which is the first international scientific body created to advance nuclear disarmament under a multilateral treaty, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. It's kind of a mouthful, but still a massive accomplishment. Civil society was felt throughout this entire conference. It wasn't just that we were there on the Friday afternoon giving our little statements for 2 states to listen in on, as I've personally seen during the NPT and related disarmament forums. You know, there's a real effort by the states to make sure that civil society weren't an afterthought, but were actually active parts of the conversation. And again, and civil society was extremely crucial to making sure that this treaty was, 1, created, 2, was adopted, and 3, entered into force. And now we're here to make sure that the treaty is fully implemented and to ensure that other states join. So I think, I mean, just kind of building on to what Marl and Maylene already said, just the power of the people that were around us was really incredible to see.
Thank you so much, all, for painting that picture. I will say, I unfortunately didn't get the privilege to be there, so it felt a little amorphous. Like, what is a meeting of states parties? What does that mean? So I appreciate the color you all put in. It sounds like you all had a really great time. So I'm going to ask a second question for all of you, and maybe we can just go in the same order. As you know, we have a lot of committed Back from the Brink activists and leaders on this call tonight, on this webinar. And I'm really curious if you all could share some insights or takeaways from the second meetings of state parties that they might be able to bring back for their local organizing efforts. So it could be things like ways they might bring on new activists or new perspectives and new thinking into our local organizing and movement building. Mara, would you like to go first?
Sure. So the Nuclear Ban Week had a lot of lessons for me personally. One of the beautiful things that was so powerful, and I think we could learn a lesson from that, is having so many different events in different fields. And it was not a specifically nuclear ban events. So there were concerts, screenings in New York City going on that people would just attend without thinking about nuclear weapons. And there we are, nuclear ban activists, just bringing the information, bringing the education to those events and raising awareness. Something that was really interesting for me when I was talking, making conversations to different people past week was that education is not out there. And as Molly also mentioned, we really have to make sure that people think and know that this issue exists and we have to do something about it. So that would be great if in our local communities we target and we are aware of different events going on and we can connect those events to our cause. And I think that way we will bring on more people and the conversation will go on. The other thing will be the power of mentorship. I think that is also something that we could have, and if younger people want to be involved, we already have experienced people in this movement in Back from the Brink, PSRs, all the chapters, just mentor younger generations, and that will make a lot of difference. I think these are the things that come to my mind right now.
Thank you. Maylene?
Yeah, that was a wonderful answer by Maral. And just to add on to that, there was a panel during the youth MSP that included Emma Akiko, and something that she said really stuck with me. She was talking about how we don't all have to be an expert on nuclear weapons to talk about it. And we're all experts in our own sense. I think that was something that was really hard for me to come to myself, because coming into this work, I had no knowledge of nuclear weapons. And I was like, how am I going to do this work if I don't know anything. Like, there are people who are better suited for this job than I am. But as I've taken the last couple of months learning, I feel like I've learned so much in such a short amount of time, and it is something that I am very passionate about and I do want to talk about with my friends. And I do understand that everyone has their own entry points into the issue. So I feel like emphasizing that and talking about the intersections, talking about what people are interested in order to bring them into the issue. And there was a quote that she said that really stuck with me. She said, "Nukes can only exist if the reality of them is obscured." And I was like, she's so right. That is so true, because I had no idea what they were. And learning about them, I'm like, why are they still a thing? And I feel like that's usually the case for most of the people that I have talked to about nuclear weapons. I tell them about it and they're like, okay, so what do we do next? Because why is this a thing? Why is this the reality that we're living in? And I feel like if we keep talking to our friends, family, and our communities about this issue, this is the way that we can bring in new activists, new perspectives, and just diverse thinking to this issue.
Thank you so much. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Molly, do you have any thoughts to add on this question?
Yeah, I might say this for every question going forward, but you two covered exactly what I was going to say. Maylene, I actually wrote here in my talking points that you don't need to be an expert to join this cause. And I think I know that's something that folks in this field are already exploring a bit and have explored for a while, to see how we can bring people in and make them comfortable in this space that is or has historically been seen as fairly policy wonky or policy heavy, and out of touch with people's reality. So creating a culture of curiosity and engagement where people can come in and there's no dumb question and there's no background that is too irrelevant. You know, like Maddie said, as in the intro remarks, I did start with the Quaker Voluntary Service, and I went to school for social work and somehow ended up here and love it, and think that I've taken some of lessons that I learned in my education and brought it to this field and to my work. So I think, yeah, it's incredibly important to make sure, not just in an abstract way, that we're, you know, oh yes, anybody is welcome into this space, but making it yeah, just creating that kind of culture where people are comfortable coming in no matter what background they have. And I think that's the power of PSR and IPPNW, is having this network of doctors and physicians that are able to connect with their peers from a public health lens and public health perspective there. I think just one other piece to this that might be helpful on the local organizing level and movement building is how we can continue this work from a grassroots level. So we tell people about this issue, we tell people about the threat. When it comes to what they can do, you know, oftentimes we hear, you know, educate others or write to your local media or write to your representative. But it's impossible for people to do that. Not impossible. It's difficult for people to do that if they've never done it before. So I think maybe going back to the foundation and having letter writing workshops or basics on public speaking, or yeah, basic workshops on how to write to a representative in an effective way. Because, you know, there are many experts that I know are on this call who have done this for decades. And especially from a younger generation, you don't know how to do these things until you do them once or twice or 3 times and learn every time what works and what doesn't. So I think taking those lessons that we've had in this field for generations and make sure that they're not lost over time. So if that's something that, you know, maybe we could all co-organize together and see if it's something online or in person, it's, you know, how we can build this up in a meaningful way and make sure that it's not just sharing the information with people, but making sure that they actually have the tools in their hand to act. Thanks.
Thank you all. I think those questions were great, and my wheels are turning. I think there's a lot of power in that cross-discipline, cross-generational, you know, how can we create relationships? And like you were saying, Molly, put that training into action, because I think that's exactly right. A lot of what I hear in this space is people are really worried about nuclear weapons, perhaps, but they don't really know what to do about it. But I think, you know, as folks with Back from the Brink, or in my role at the Union of Concerned Scientists, we have a lot of answers to that question. And I think some of the next questions we'll be digging into that. So this next question is for Maylene. I'm curious if there was anything from the second meeting of states parties that sparked any inspiration around the Southern California Back from the Brink Hub. You could also maybe tell folks a little bit about what that means and what you all have in store or what your thinking is. Love to hear more.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the Southern California Back from the Brink Hub is something that we'll be creating in the upcoming year. So basically, Back from the Brink has a bunch of different local hubs in different cities, and Southern California does not yet have one. And so my job is to create that hub and to bring folks from Southern California together in order to be part of Back from the Brink on a larger scale. And I truly want this hub to be something that is diverse, intersectional, and youth heavy, something that we haven't seen as like a lot of in this movement in general. And so during the 2SP, I've had conversations with other youth folks, and my conversation with McGovern and Vincent and Tandy, those were like little things that sparked inspiration for the creation of the Southern California Hub. For example, when I was talking with other youth folks, we were talking about what are the barriers in this movement, and one of the main things was the accessibility in terms of language, in terms of the issue in general, because a lot of us, we didn't grow up talking about nuclear weapons, because what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened before our time. So this wasn't something we really talked about. And then to add on that is the narrative that we're learning at such a young age. The only time that we really learned about nuclear weapons was when we learned about Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the narrative that we were taught was that dropping the bomb was necessary. And that was something that as young adults now, we're looking back on and was like, this is such a false narrative that we were taught at such a young age. So how do we shift that narrative? And how do we talk to other young folks about this? Because one of the folks that I was talking to, they tutor kids as young as 4th and 5th grade. And those kids thought that it was necessary to drop the bomb. And so we're just like, wow, like kids as young as 8 years old are thinking that nuclear weapons are good for us. So how do we shift that narrative in something that has been ingrained in our society? So that is something that I'm currently thinking about, and being able to reach younger folks, like students in college, students in high school even, and being able to talk about this issue, being able to shed some light and educate the general public who know nothing about nuclear weapons. And Vincent and Tandy was talking about how do we develop a nuclear consciousness. So those are things that I'm currently thinking about in terms of the hub, how to bring folks in from different entry points, how to attest to their different passions and passion projects, because nuclear weapons is an issue that is very intersectional and does connect to a bunch of different social issues that people are passionate about. And like being able to make it more clear that this is an issue that is currently happening and is something that we can all do something about. And one of the main things is how do we use social media as a vehicle to outreach to different folks. So as I said, Emma Kiko was a great panelist that I heard from at the Youth MSP, and she was saying that social media will be a main factor in this nuclear disarmament campaign. And I was saying she's so right. And when I think about the way social media is used in other organizing and in the activist spaces, I have yet to see anything about nuclear weapons. And I feel like that's a big reason why younger folks don't know a lot about this issue. We're seeing a lot about different things like climate change, racial justice issues, and folks are very passionate about that and want to know what they could do to help, but we don't see anything about nuclear weapons. Therefore, younger folks aren't as eager to step into this issue. And so how can we change that? So that's sort of the inspiration that sparked for me in terms of what I can do when creating this Southern California Back from the Brink Hub and how to bring people in.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's really exciting. I can't wait to see how that work starts to shake out. And that was a great segue to the next question, which is for Molly. So Molly, you played a major role in organizing the Youth MSP, as we talked about, event, and are a key leader in the Youth for TPNW initiative, Treaty on the Prohibition for Nuclear Weapons. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts coming out of the second meeting of states parties and the Youth MSP event about the role of young people in the movement to abolish nuclear weapons. And again, this $1 million question we've kind of been talking a lot about of how do we get more young people involved? And is there ways, maybe an example, how can we build better bridges in the United States with leaders in movements such as the youth climate justice movement? Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. I will do my best to answer it as best I can. But yeah, thank you. And it was so great to have Maylene there throughout the day of the Youth MSP as well. And we had a number of IPPNW students and PSR medical students here from the States there. So it was great to see kind of the connections and the threads of all of these various organizations coming together. Yeah, so just a quick brief on Youth for TPNW because it's a fairly new organization. So we're a cohort of young leaders from around the world, some of whom are more traditional policy experts or more movement builders like me, students who are interested in this area, so international relations students and others that are trying to get their foot in the door. But we also have a wide variety of delegates that are environmental activists, artists, scientists, people who are focused on other issue areas, and who do this work either as through a kind of volunteer base or kind of as a hobby, or just because they were concerned after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and further violence that we've seen throughout this year. So it's kind of an eclectic group of people who's truly been such a joy to work with, and really exciting, as Maylene said, to get people together in a room and really have open conversations and brand new perspectives on these things. So this year in New York, we brought about 100 people together last Tuesday on the margins of the second meeting of states parties for a half-day meeting. We joined together in common cause, we learned from one another, and we made a few plans for the years ahead to see the full and complete implementation of the TPNW. So with all of that said, it may go without saying that young people are already here and now. We're not some kind of abstract future leaders of tomorrow or people that already aren't in the room at all. We can also see on this very call that that's not the case. All 4 of us who coincidentally have names starting with M are all here who care about this issue and who want to see a better future for all of us. So I think it's really important when we're talking about youth leadership and youth engagement, as we're doing right now, but to bring the young people in the room to share perspectives and not just kind of blindly say into the abyss, where are all the young people? Because we are here. But there's a lot of work to be done. These MSPs are great and they're great movement building tools, but they're not it. I took a little peek in the chat, which maybe I shouldn't have done, but I saw Timon asked a question about, we see a bunch of young leaders everywhere, and it's true, there isn't too much of a massive youth movement here in the States. So why is that the case? I'm honestly not sure. But I know that there is a lot of work ahead of us, and I know that we do have the tools though to build up that movement. Those of us who are millennials, Gen Z, and those 2 generations, we're a few generations removed from the Cold War. We didn't grow up with the threat of testing. We didn't grow up with the threat of use coming up. So I kind of have a twofold system that I have seen to be useful in this work as I engage young leaders through Youth for TPNW and young medical students through my work with IPPNW. So one is being education. So letting people know about the realities of our current systems, the dire threat of nuclear war, the threat that it brings to all of us, no matter where you are in the world, and the threat that it brings to our environment. That obviously comes with a lot of fear. And I think it's really important for us to not just stop there at the fear. I think that is something that stops people where they're at and doesn't provide any future action coming. You know, people feel backed into a corner and don't know what to do next. But I think it's important to let people know about the reality that we're currently in, because we're all stewards of this land and we all deserve a future, right? So it's incredibly important to let people know about the current threats that are in front of us, but in the same breath to give opportunities for solutions. So just, you know, the first half of this conversation was all about solutions and all about these areas of hope that we see. I think it's incredibly important to not leave out that, and we have the tools piece to it all. And the second to this kind of twofold system is to meet people where they're at, which Maylene touched on earlier, but bringing in the interconnections of the climate movement and justice, looking at how divestment from nuclear weapons can play a major role in resolving the climate crisis, can play a major role in providing healthcare to people around this country and around the world, seeing how divestment from militarism can really, really ease up all of our social ills right now. Because it is absolutely abhorrent that we are spending billions upon billions of dollars on these weapons of mass destruction, while people in our country, which is meant to be, you know, one of the richest in the world, do not have basic social infrastructure. So I think both educating people on the harm and of the risk, and then meeting them where they're at, I've seen to be incredibly helpful with young leaders who are looking for ways to engage and who you know, even if we're talking to young climate leaders, can sometimes feel stuck and feel that existential dread. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. Very powerful. I'm convinced. I'm sold. Great. So our next question for Marl. We would love to hear your thoughts on strategies for engaging more early career professionals, such as yourself, in local organizing and advocating for nuclear abolition. So maybe that's in health-related fields, such as yours, early career scientists, which is what my organization focuses on, academics, government, public sector, or even entrepreneurs and business leaders. Really, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, early career professionals, or maybe elder millennials, perhaps. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you for this wonderful question. I think this is important to think about. First of all, I loved what Maylene and Molly said. Everything that you said, I agree with that. And I think it's important now to bring on the people like me in the early career professionals to also have their own identity within these movements. Youth are having identity and they are really having great actions happening, but I have been in the movement for more than 10 years now. I have been in different campaigns, different stages, and I have met many people that were very active in the youth movement, but they started to fade out, and I didn't see them in the rest of the actions that I was involved with. And so they go after their careers. Of course, it's a new stage. There are so many things that are new to them, they're worried about. But how to keep them involved, the ones that started from when they were considered youth, and how to bring on new people that are not considered youth anymore and they're early professionals. One of the things that I personally am practicing is going to the professional associations. For many professions within the US, there are existing associations that we are a member of and we are active with, we do volunteering with. They're not necessarily social issues based, they're just professional, but definitely, if you go into those associations, you will find a section, a subgroup, a key contact person that is involved with social issues. From my own experience being a physical therapist, I really wanted to bring the conversation of nuclear abolition to my association there were no groups, such groups that I could kind of join. So I started one. I started a group called Environmental PT within the American Physical Therapy Association. I started that to be a hub and to be a way for me to bring the nuclear abolition inside that, because in my profession and many other professions, people are not talking about nuclear abolition because they think it's a security issue. And I'm so glad that we, in this second MSP, we had the TPNW states identify nuclear weapons as insecurity, like they basically talked about it. Now that we have this key point, I think this is time for us, each of us in any profession that we are, in any state, any location that we are, just find one association, contact them, and build this connection. Once we are there, definitely there are people who want to get engaged with social activism and the social responsibility that's actually in the code of ethics for health professionals, for many other professionals. We have it written on our code of ethics. If we want to practice ethically, we have to be involved with social responsibility in our communities and beyond that at an international level. So I would say target the associations, the professional associations, and I think that will cover most of the careers that you just mentioned in healthcare, business, entrepreneurs. All of them are definitely identifying under an association that we could find our way into.
Thank you so much. That was great. And thank you for all of your answers. So now we're going to pivot slightly into the more open question and answer. So thank you to all of our attendees who have submitted some questions. We've got a little less than 10 minutes. So I'm just going to read the questions, and whichever one of you would like to share some thoughts, you can just jump in. We might not have time for all of you to answer all the questions, but we'll see how many we can get to. And this first question is sort of building a little bit upon one of the points you were making, Molly. It's asking, what are some of the key points to keep in mind when developing resources or materials to educate the general public, especially younger folks, youth, about the reality of nuclear risk today and the need to eliminate nuclear weapons and how to take action?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think two things that come to mind are making sure that it's not too jargon heavy, because that makes people kind of step back and say what Maylene was saying too earlier on of, this is out of my wheelhouse. I don't know what the deal with these weapons are. I thought this might be an interesting topic, and now it's kind of, yeah, out of my capacity there. So I think staying away from that jargon and keeping simple, plain language, which doesn't mean that it has to detract from the truth, and doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be complicated, because these weapons, you know, there have been decades of ensuring that these weapons are hard to understand, right? And that we don't have anything to do with them. But focusing on the humanitarian impacts and focusing on the solutions that we have to get rid of them, I think is incredibly important. Again, of making sure that it's not just what the problem is, but saying what the solutions are at hand. And I think finding ways, if this is some kind of toolkit or if it's an online resource, ensuring that there are ways for folks to connect with others. I think one thing that I saw at 2MSP that was amazing was just this community that's been built over the decades and over the past few years through ICANN and through other NGOs in this field. So ensuring that folks have people to connect with, so that you're not kind of a solo actor taking on this massive issue on their own.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to what Molly said. I actually went to a panel about this during the 2MSP week, and it was talking about how nuclear disarmament is taught. And I feel like we have to kind of like gain a common understanding in whatever audience we're talking about nuclear disarmament to, like trying to gain like a common understanding, like what do you know, what does security mean to you? What do you know how many nuclear weapons there are in today's current society? How many states have nuclear weapons? And then being able to bring in different stories like Hubakasha testimonies, being able to talk about like the nuclear testing, like the testing sites. Do you know how many are in the United States? How many there are globally? And just being able to talk about what are the debates that are happening in the nuclear world, like being able to bring in different ways to teach. I feel like for me, a large part of like my learning was being able to watch different videos, different documentaries, and hearing from different speakers. And I feel like in today's generation, we have such a short attention span due to social media and like scrolling on TikTok. So I think that being able to watch something like a short series or documentary is very helpful for us in terms of our learning and sparking that inspiration inside of us to like, oh, I want to do something. I want to help. I want to be part of this movement. Because I know for me, I watched In the Dark of the Valley talking about the moms of Santa Susana and the nuclear reactor meltdown that happened there. And that really touched me. And I was like, why do I have no clue about this? I've been living in Los Angeles for the past 4 years and I had no clue. So things like that in order to engage multiple groups of people.
Awesome. So maybe connectedly speaking about Los Angeles, Maylene, there's someone in the chat would love to hear more about some of the work that students in Burbank are doing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and good to see you, Ira. I've had the pleasure of working with a high school student that goes to John Burroughs High School in Burbank, and they actually started a new club called the Nuclear Abolitionist Club. And one of the first things that we did working together was being able to bring forth a Back from the Brink resolution to the Burbank City Council. And this student was able to set up a meeting with the mayor of Burbank and Dr. Ira Helfand. And that meeting went great. They are actually, I got news recently that the resolution is being introduced to the council on December 12th. And it's titled The Presentation of a Proclamation in Support of the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons. And so that is something that we're looking forward to. And we are also working to work with different students within the greater Los Angeles County, and try to build off of the momentum that Eddie, honestly, the student, started in Burbank. So it's very exciting.
Very exciting. Thank you for that update. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time for this panel Q&A. So I would like to ask one final question and have each of the three of you share maybe a minute of your thoughts. Maybe we'll go in reverse order. I have Molly start. So the question is, would love for you all to name one thing that individuals or organizations in the nuclear abolition community could do in 2024 to help build the momentum. That's the name of this event here tonight. And to build the momentum and create the political conditions for change here in the United States. Molly, you want to start?
Sure. Easy question. We'll have it down by the end of this. No, I mean, I think if I had one thing that's on my mind following the second meeting of states parties, where I'm simultaneously still buzzing on the excitement of seeing everyone and so incredibly tired from seeing everyone, is to remain hopeful and to build community. I think that this not only sustains us as people that are already in this space, but I think it helps others potentially see the role that they can play in the sphere. So we talk a lot about fear in this space, and we talk a lot about how it's seen from the outside looking in that we're a bunch of policy wonks and people that think in a way that others might not be able to, or people that are experts in international relations. So I think having warm relationships with one another and relationships outside of just these types of things and being able to connect with one another on more than one issue, I think both sustains us and allows others to come in, and shows that we're doing this together with one another and for one another. So that's what I think will help us in 2024 and beyond.
Great, Maylene.
Yes, I agree with Molly 100%. I really think it starts with our communities, being able to look at what communities are we positioned in ourselves, and being able to talk about this issue within those communities, whether it's family, friends, or work. And I feel like if we start on that smaller scale, being able to talk about this issue within our communities, it could spread out and it can take off into a bigger movement in a sense. But yeah, for me, I feel like being able to talk within the communities that we live in and gaining that support in terms of constituent power. And from there, we can pressure our elected officials to talk about nuclear disarmament.
Great. And Marl, would you like to have the final word of this section?
Yes, I completely agree with Molly and Maylene. Community is very important. Keeping the network and expanding into new places, as I was talking, associations, students, schools, in any part at any capacity that we are working and we're living, we should just bring more people on, having the conversation and normalizing this conversation. I think if we keep talking about it, really people will be more comfortable talking and acting upon this nuclear abolition issue. And that all, again, goes back to community, building and keeping it.
Hear, hear. Thank you all so much to the panelists. And again, thanks to all the attendees. I wish we could have gotten to all of the great questions you asked, but unfortunately, now we're going to transition. We're going to toss it back to Denise for the next section of our event this evening. Thank you again, M&M, for your thoughts.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We're going to, just if you're looking at the clock, this is a 75-minute webinar, so we're going to go till 1/4 past the hour. And I would just want to thank our panelists so much. All of you are so, it was wonderful spending time with you in New York. Your energy and enthusiasm is infectious. And I love that we ended the conversation talking about community, because we all here on this call are a community and we have very specific ways that we engage and that we have engaged. So we're going to talk about back with the Brink's theory of change a little bit, our accomplishments this year, which so many of you were a part of, and then looking forward, our plans for next year. So Back from the Brink was designed to give anyone, any individual, organization, or elected official a way to get involved in nuclear abolition and make a real difference. We organize locally in communities because we know that our members of Congress whose voices and votes impact the executive branch aren't likely to act on this issue unless they're hearing about it from the people who put them in power, who gave them their jobs, their constituents, people who live and work in the communities they are elected to represent. Our mantra is that nuclear weapons are a local issue, whether it's local tax dollars squandered on nuclear weapons that could instead be directed to community needs, or the fact that cities are targets and keeping communities safe is very much within any locality's purview, or the many communities that have been impacted by nuclear weapons. We work to connect these issues to folks' everyday security concerns and community needs. We help local advocates educate and engage diverse organizations in their community while building support for our policy solutions. And that support is both qualitative and quantifiable and demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that cities, counties, states, organizations, elected officials, communities, constituents demand that their representatives take action. And this year, we've been able to see some of the results of the local impacting federal policy with the 42, impacting a federal level with 42 House members now co-sponsoring HRES 77. Our organizing strategy is adaptable because what works in one community may not at all be what works in another. But what is true in all places is that we seek to bring people together in common cause, to break out of our silos, to reach out beyond the traditional peace and disarmament community. And every new endorsement and every resolution matters Every new activist and community leader matters. All of these efforts are meant to build into a collective force that is powerful enough to change the nuclear status quo and get this country to lead a global effort to abolish nuclear weapons. Next slide. So Back from the Brink has been endorsed by over 470 organizations, over 400 local and state officials, and numerous experts and civic leaders. This year, notable endorsements included the National Baptist Convention of America and the National Council of Churches, which is the largest ecumenical body in the US. Next slide. To date, over 80 US municipalities, counties, and state bodies have voted to adopt resolutions supporting our policy platform. And we're very proud that the majority of the US cities that have joined ICANN Cities Appeal came to Back from the Brink resolutions. And these resolutions not only help demonstrate strong constituent support for abolition, they are powerful educational and organizing tools, distilling key problems and solutions to a series of statements that are easy to understand. This year, we've added sources and endnotes to our sample resolution, which you can find on the advocacy tools section of our website. In 2023, new resolutions came from Johnson County, Iowa, South Portland, Maine, South Salt Lake City, Utah, New Haven, Connecticut, and Madison, Wisconsin. The Madison resolution also included divestment and a strong statement of support from Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway. Next slide. HRS 77, the congressional resolution that mirrors Back from the Brink resolutions introduced by Representatives Jim McGovern and Earl Blumenauer. Thanks to the persistent effort of Back to the Brink activists, so many of you here with us tonight, we now have 42 co-sponsors, and this will continue to be a big focus for us next year. And to be clear, our goal with this resolution is to cultivate congressional leadership on nuclear disarmament, to get more and more members of Congress to pay attention and build enough support that we force the administration to take notice. Next slide. Back from the Brink has a comprehensive resources webpage with advocacy tools related to HRS 77, including a backgrounder, sample scripts, social media posts. We organized a letter to House reps signed by 154 organizations. We held a national call-in day in pursuit of co-sponsors and produced a wonderful webinar featuring Representative McGovern, who shared his perspective and insights. Also, the U.S. Conference of Mayors adopted a resolution at its annual meeting calling on Congress to pass HRS 77. And this was the first time in its history that it endorsed a specific piece of nuclear disarmament-related legislation. Next slide. Back from the Brink is also proud of the role we played in helping the arms community and disarmament activists around the country to take advantage of the attention brought to the issue this summer with the release of Oppenheimer. As many of you know, we produced a series of advocacy resources for folks to take action around the Oppenheimer film and to support their local organizing. Next slide. Our co-branded flyers and HRS 77 advocacy cards were distributed to moviegoers by Back from the Brink in 23 communities across 16 states. And stay on this slide. We're a slide ahead. So most recently, we are proud and delighted that this fall we recruited, with the help of so many of you, some 220 local and state officials who signed on to an open letter to President Biden urging him to send an observer to the 2MSP and to lead negotiations with nuclear-armed states for a multilateral agreement to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. So we now have over 400 local and state officials who endorsed our campaign, and in 2024, a key goal will be to get many of them to more forcefully and regularly speak out on this issue. Next slide. We're also really excited about our growing network of Back from the Brink hubs throughout the country. We now have 14 hubs working on Back from the Brink and other nuclear disarmament initiatives in their community. These are real people doing real impactful organizing in their community who are committed to building out this network. And we're committed to supporting these folks with trainings and learning, and to connect with one another to learn from each other. And next slide. Now, building momentum. As we look to 2024, our plans and initiatives are still taking shape, but there are a few things we know will guide our work and thinking. The November election will shape the future of this country and the planet in profound ways. Our job is to make the threat of nuclear war and the imperative for nuclear disarmament part of our future is at stake narrative. We need to build enough people power to demonstrate that there is, in fact, a constituency in this country that demands bold change and policy action on nuclear disarmament, that there would be a political price to pay for those who don't take this threat to our future seriously, our democracy. Back from the Brink is building the foundation for that constituency. It's also safe to say that in 2024, our overarching objectives are to grow and diversify this constituency and to better activate and mobilize those who've already joined or endorsed this campaign, including the hundreds of local and state officials who've spoken out by signing our letters, the municipal officials and state legislators who introduced or supported Back from the Brink resolutions, getting more HRES 77 co-sponsors, and getting those who've already co-sponsored to show more leadership, to speak out forcefully, to use their influence within the Biden administration. All of the faith institutions who embrace this campaign and who have a long history on this issue, we need to engage more of the faithful, the large percentage of voters in the US who identify as people of faith and whose politics and advocacy are guided by their faith, many of whom understand full well what is at stake. Our 470 endorsing organizations represent millions of voters. So we need many more of these groups to become partners, to activate their supporters and recognize that all of our agendas and ability to make progress and do good depends on whether we prevent a nuclear catastrophe. And we'll need all of your help to get these groups more engaged. We are seeing more and more engagement from nuclear abolition, from young people and impacted communities whose voices are so powerful. And of course, we want to engage them more deeply in our campaign. And individual action matters too. What any one of us does matters and can have a profound impact. Our campaign is committed to doing all we can to help any individual be the best advocate for nuclear disarmament in their community, whether it's learning to start a new Back from the Brink hub or get involved in an existing one, working with us to leverage the relationships that you have in your community with elected officials, with the media, community leaders, other organizations with whom you work, other fellow people of faith, and to be a public ambassador and not be afraid to be dogged in your efforts to insist that the media, elected officials, and others in the community take this issue seriously. And if you request meetings with your elected officials, we can help you figure out what to ask, whether it's building a Back from the Brink resolution and building a coalition in support of that resolution, or in areas where resolutions have passed, it might be exploring what more those officials can do to elevate this issue and speak out. We also need to upping our game when it comes to visibility, communications, and media efforts. As I mentioned, it's unconscionable that the mainstream media all but ignored 2MSP. And some of our best opportunities for visibility will happen in communities where all of this great organizing is happening and where you can use public platforms and social media to exert pressure and bring attention to the issue on why nuclear weapons are, in fact, a local issue. And finally, as we know, there are very consequential elections happening this coming year for the presidency, Congress, and various local and state held positions. And we'll be looking to work with all of you to figure out strategic ways to engage in nonpartisan candidate and voter education efforts. And over the next months, as candidates come knocking on our doors to support them, let's not hesitate to tell them that their views and positions on nuclear weapons and disarmament matter a great deal to us. Next slide. Here are some very specific ways that you can get involved with Back from the Brink. You can endorse Back from the Brink and ask others to do so. Call, write, or meet with your House rep to co-sponsor HRES 77. Organize municipal resolution efforts. Co-sponsor public education events. Write letters to the editor. Attend local organizing meetups the third Tuesdays of the month that we hold. Follow us on social media. Form or join a hub, and for coalition, and to become a coalition partner for organizations. And of course, another way to help the campaign is through financial support. So I'm going to turn it over now to Brennan Tierney, our development consultant, for just a few words about our year-end matching campaign.
Thanks so much, Denise. Hello, everybody. Thanks again to Maddie and our awesome panelists, and thanks to you all for being here tonight. My name is Brennan Tierney. I'm a public school civics teacher in Massachusetts and also work as a development consultant for Back from the Brink. As Denise alluded to earlier, nuclear disarmament advocacy is woefully underfunded. In recent years, despite the dawn of what some analysts are calling a new nuclear age, some of the largest funders are withdrawing altogether from the nuclear risk reduction field. And with what little funding remains, a small fraction of that goes towards grassroots organizations like Back from the Brink. Simply put, the philanthropic sector does not adequately resource the grassroots sector. Yet here we are, among other things, challenging the United States plan to spend an estimated 1.7 trillion taxpayer dollars over the next 30 years to replace and modernize its entire arsenal, which of course has the backing of powerful special interests. Back from the Brink has and continues to depend on grassroots supporters like you to sustain and grow this campaign. To accomplish all of what you've heard about tonight, it's you who makes this work possible. And to that end, we have just launched a $5,000 matching campaign where all donations are matched dollar for dollar through December 31st. And I'm just sharing now the link in the chat. If you care about Back from the Brink's mission, if you want to support the type of work you've heard about tonight and keep building momentum in 2024, I hope you will consider making a contribution toward our $5,000 goal. Whether it's $5, $25, $50, or $100, your donation tonight will have double the impact. Among other things, your donation will enable Back from the Brink to support our network of hubs and onboard additional field organizers to further expand our campaign's reach. I'd like you to consider what amount of support you could offer tonight, knowing that you would be a part of the solution to preventing nuclear war. Think about a year from now, where if we are successful, working toward a world free of nuclear weapons could be a rallying cry of the 2024 election, and where we might steer away from the arms race that we are speeding into right now. I'm pleased to share that in just a few short days, we've already raised $710, including $160 tonight, from 9 individual supporters. If 50 people on this call gave $50 tonight, we'd be more than halfway toward our goal. And also, if you donate $75 or more, you'll receive a Back from the Brink t-shirt as a token of our appreciation. So in conclusion, Back from the Brink has made tremendous progress, but there is much more work to be done, and we need your support in order to do it. Thanks so much for considering, and please feel free to contact me with any questions. With that, I'll turn it back over to Denise to close us out.
Okay, the last slide, which may be the most important slide, which is about staying in touch with us. So you can see in the upper left-hand corner there under organizing, Jeremy at preventnuclearwar.org. Reach out to Jeremy with any questions you have. We also have an info email. And please follow us on social media. And particularly if you haven't been joining our meetups, send Jeremy an email. We'll make sure you get invited third Tuesday of the month. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it. And we want to take all this great energy from 2MSP and, like I said earlier, let it drive our efforts forward in this incredibly consequential year, which is soon to be upon us. Thank you very much and good night.